before the universe existed, before time even began to flow, before any matter or life took shape. There was God. Genesis chapter 1 does not start by describing the act of creation. Instead, it immediately focuses our attention on the Creator himself. The very first words of all Scripture point toward this singular truth. They declare, "In the beginning, God." These four foundational words unpack one of the Bible's most profound theological realities. They teach us that God existed prior to absolutely everything else. He is independent of all creation, time, and the structure of the universe. In this study, we will explore Genesis 1's profound lessons about God's eternal nature. Understanding this truth fundamentally shapes how we view all of history and existence. We must carefully examine Genesis 1:1 when it states, "In the beginning." That word, beginning, does not signify God's own commencement. Rather, it marks the starting point for our universe. It is the inception of time and all physical reality. The sacred text pointedly avoids framing God's existence in temporal terms. It never suggests the phrasing, "when God first began to exist," nor does it say, "when God suddenly appeared on the scene." We do not read any word suggesting, "when God was finally formed into being." The passage states it far more simply and powerfully. God already was. This means that God possesses an inherent quality of having no origin whatsoever. He required no initiating cause to bring himself into being. There is no record of a moment that served as God's personal starting line. Critically, God has absolutely no dependence on any external factor for his existence. The actual process of creation, as we know it, only commences in verse 1. For God, the Eternal One, there was no such starting point to be recorded. This forms one of the most robust affirmations within all of Scripture. It powerfully declares God's eternal nature, existing infinitely before and beyond all temporal boundaries. The initial chapter of Genesis meticulously lays out the structure for time, space, and matter. It details the separation of light and darkness across successive periods. It establishes the distinction between the heavens above and the earth below. It outlines the formation of the vast seas and the emerging dry land. Every single one of these foundational elements is inherently dependent upon time and structure. Yet, before even one of these components was brought forth, God already existed in fullness. This sets forth an incredibly profound and beautiful theological revelation. It shows definitively that God is not merely a component within creation. Instead, he is the ultimate, sovereign cause that initiated all of creation. He does not exist sieben inside, the flow of time as we experience it. Conversely, the very dimension of time dwells entirely within his being. Similarly, God does not reside within the expanse of space. The entire spatial framework was established and formed by his spoken word. Therefore, God is necessarily not constrained by the physical laws he himself instituted. He remains wholly transcendent, standing perfectly above every rule of physics. Because the evidence proves God existed before the very concept of before existed, he is sovereign over everything. Genesis chapter 1 vividly portrays God actively speaking all of creation into being. We repeatedly encounter the command, "And God said." This divine speech immediately reveals his absolute authority over all things. It demonstrates an inherent, unstoppable power behind his every declaration. Furthermore, it underscores that creation was executed with clear purpose. Every creative act was the direct result of divine, conscious intention. Creation, therefore, cannot be dismissed as a random occurrence. It was never meant to be viewed as a purely natural, self-generating process. It is, instead, the direct consequence of a divine, authoritative command. A God who was present before the first moment of creation is a God with ultimate power sui all that was created. Genesis 1 clearly demonstrates that God's creative impulse did not stem from any personal lack. He did not bring the world into existence because he was missing something vital. Prior to all else, God existed in a state of absolute completeness. He was entirely satisfied within himself from eternity past. He was utterly whole, possessing no internal deficiency or emptiness whatsoever. The universe, therefore, does not add any value or stature to God. This is the essence of what it means for God to be self-existent. Theologians use a specific term to capture this incredible attribute, acd. Acd describes God's perfect independence and total self-sufficiency. Understanding this self-sufficiency has a profound implication for us. It means that the very act of creation was an extension of his love, not a fulfillment of a necessity. While Genesis 1 shows the presence of God, the remainder of Scripture illuminates something deeper. It shows us that God eternally existed in rich relationship as Father, Son, and Spirit. Before the world was even a concept, the triune God already enjoyed profound internal fellowship. This eternal state included perfect, deep relationship between the persons of the Godhead. It involved unending, perfect love flowing between them. This fellowship was characterized by perfect, seamless unity in action and being. The divine communication within the Godhead was ceaseless and perfect. Thus, creation was not God starting a lonely endeavor out of boredom. It was God choosing to extend his already existing, perfect love outward into reality. The fact that God existed before creation unequivocally proves that love is older than the universe itself. Because God was already fully present before creation commenced, everything created possesses inherent qualities. This means that the entire universe, by design, carries intrinsic purpose. Every part of creation was imbued with a specific, predetermined design from its inception. Furthermore, it was stamped with undeniable meaning from the moment of its formation. The cosmos operates according to established order because its source is ordered. We can confidently state that the universe is not the result of random chance occurrences. Likewise, the existence of humanity was not some cosmic accident along the way. The gift of life itself is certainly not without intrinsic meaning. The eternal, pre-existing God intentionally fashioned a world filled with structure. He brought forth a reality possessing beauty and a magnificent, intended purpose. Therefore, our presence here is not merely a fortunate byproduct of chaos. We exist because the eternal, self-sufficient God actively willed our existence into being. Genesis 1 serves as a massive revelation about Feventwide, who God is, not just what he performed. Before the very first moment anyone could count as a beginning, God already existed in his fullness. Long before the concept of time could even be measured, God reigned supreme, utterly sovereign over all potential things. Before the first particle of creation was ever formed, God was already eternally complete and perfectly satisfied. Grasping this foundational truth must shape the core of everything we come to believe. It compels us to accept that God is eternally existing. It demands that we recognize God as perfectly self-sufficient in his being. It requires acknowledging that God is absolutely sovereign in his rule. Above all, it confirms God as the deliberate, intentional creator of everything. To truly understand the universe and our place within it, we must align our starting point with where Scripture begins. We must begin with the contemplation of the God who exists before all.